Good morning. So today we're going to talk about something that is applicable to cell division, but it's a little bit more in the real world realm. We're going to be talking about cancer. Now, I know obviously this can be a sensitive topic. It's something that it might be very close to your heart. You might have someone very close to you, or you yourself might have been diagnosed with cancer. I think it's really important to be aware of what cancer is, what can cause cancer, and I think that understanding it at a cellular level, right, might really help. I know for myself, I've had several of my relatives that I'm very close with that have been diagnosed with cancer, and actually understanding what it is and what's happening at the cellular level really helped me. So we're going to be looking at cancer, what it is, and I'm going to give you a hint. It's very closely related to cell division. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when you copy DNA. So in mitosis, we talked about the fact that you have to make a copy of your DNA. So you're copying 46 chromosomes. You as a human have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. The equivalent of copying 46 chromosomes is like making 1,000,000 copies of all of the hard drives that are in the world. So I don't really know if we appreciate how much information is inside DNA and how much information goes into, how much work goes into copying that. So in grade 12, you're going to learn a little bit more about how DNA works and how the copying of DNA works. But just know for now that copying that information takes a lot of work and a lot of time. However, although this is an amazing feat, it does sometimes go wrong. This can result in cancerous growth. So when you are copying the DNA, we have a lot of fail-safes to make sure that mistakes don't happen. However, since it's such a big process, mistakes do happen. So oftentimes when this DNA copying goes wrong, this is actually what can cause cancer. So when I say what causes cancer, people often give me carcinogens, smoking, UV, but at the very cellular level, what causes cancer is cell division gone wrong. So if we're going to look at a cancer cell, what a cancer cell is, it's one that continues to divide despite messages from the nucleus telling it to stop. So cells only divide when they need to grow or repair, or they're being used in reproduction. A cancer cell is a cell that keeps dividing and dividing and dividing, even though everything around it is telling it to stop. So I know this doesn't sound problematic, but think about how fast it can happen. You have a cell that you don't want to double, and then those cells double, so they quadruple, and then so on and so forth. So you can see that all this extra growth and all this extra cell division can actually be quite harmful to the body. Cancer often occurs in cells that are rapidly dividing. So cells that already have to go through rapid cell division for repair, they are more likely to develop cancer. That's because since you're duplicating the DNA so much more often there, it's more likely that mistakes are going to happen, right? If you're copying your notes out 15 times, it's more likely you're going to make a mistake than if you're just copying your notes out once. Areas that have a high cell reproduction rate include skin. So I'm sure you've heard of skin cancer. Your lungs, so lung cancer, very common. And the breast tissue is also constantly reproducing. So breast cancer is very common. You're often replacing cells in your intestinal tract. So cancers related to digestion are also common as well. We're going to look at a couple of cancer terms now. Now, again, you might have heard of them, but you might not actually know what you mean. So malignant, as soon as I say this is a bit of a scary word. Malignant is a cancerous tumor. So it's a tumor that's considered to be cancerous. Benign, on the other hand, is a non-cancerous tumor. So oftentimes when individuals find a tumor, they automatically assume it's cancer. There's actually two types of tumors. There's tumors that might be extra growth, just because extra growth is happening. That's non-cancerous. Or a malignant tumor is a growth because the cells within it won't stop dividing. That's an example of a cancerous tumor. Metastasis is another word that you might have heard of. What metastasis is cancer spreading to other areas of the body. So you might have just heard the term, it's spread from his lungs to his brain. Obviously not great. The actual biological term for that is metastasis, and it's one of the stages of cancer. Let's talk a little bit about what a normal cell might look like and what the fate of a normal cell is. We're going to talk about this a bit more in our next note as well too. So we have our normal cell. This is in the normal range of cell division. This cell is going to go ahead and it's going to divide. So once a cell divides, it's got two cells. And then these cells are then going to divide again. So you would eventually have 4 cells, and so on and so forth. So the more that you divide, the more likely it is to get to that uncontrolled cell division. So you have a normal cell that divides, it divides again, and if it starts dividing uncontrollably, that's that range for uncontrolled cell division. That's a potentially cancerous cell. So if you have a cell that's dividing, not controlled, it's a potentially cancerous cell. There's 2 options here. You could have those cells form a benign tumor. That's a tumor that does not affect the surrounding cells unless it's physically crowding them. Or you can see how irregular this looks. This is a malignant tumor, and this is a tumor that's going to affect those surrounding cells. You can also have a piece of this tumor break off and travel. That's that idea of metastasis. So if this cell travels, leaves the tumor, travels to another body site and starts a new tumor, that's an example of metastasis, cancer traveling to other parts of the body. So cancer is essentially an accumulation of mutations. So when cells divide, random changes can occur. These are called mutations. So that's a mistake, right? So rather than copying of the DNA correctly, you've made a mistake. That's called a mutation. Mutations aren't always bad. Mutations are actually totally normal. Mutations are actually how we got to evolve to what we are. So some mutations can be seen as adaptive and very advantageous. Some mutations can be very harmful to the body. So sometimes mutations occur in the DNA that controls cell division. So if there's a mistake in the part of the DNA that controls cell division, that's what can cause cancer. So if you accidentally mutate the part of the cell that says stop dividing, the cell is going to keep dividing, keep dividing, keep dividing, and that's an example of a cancerous cell. Cancer doesn't just actually happen with one mutation. So you might be really nervous right now thinking about, are my cells making mistakes? Cancer is actually an accumulation of mutations. So it has to be a bunch of mistakes made despite those fail-safes in place. So typically we say that cancer is going to be an accumulation of 7 mutations. So if you have 7 mutations in the same area, that's a cell that might become cancerous. So it's not just one mutation. You actually have to have several mutations in order to have a risk of developing cancer in that cell. Let's talk a little bit about things that can cause those mutations. So we mentioned before that mutations just naturally happen. However, there are some things that we do to our body or that we put into our body that makes it more likely that you are going to mutate your cells. So a mutagen is a substance or agent that induces heritable change in cells or organisms. So it's essentially something that in your body, you put into your body, or something that affects your body that could cause your DNA to mutate, and that could actually be passed on to your children. So it could actually cause the DNA in your gametes to mutate, your sperm or your egg cells, and pass it on to your children. So obviously you want to avoid anything that might be mutagenic. A carcinogen is a substance that induces unregulated growth process leading to cancer. So a carcinogen is something that you might put into your body or be exposed to that can make your cells more likely to mutate and more likely to become cancerous. So your cells become more likely to mutate and are more likely to have those 7 mutations accumulate and become cancerous. So common carcinogens include X-rays, UV radiation, and smoking. So you might have heard of the term that smoking causes cancer. Not totally true. Smoking can cause cells to rapidly divide, and those cells rapidly dividing, that's what cancer is. So all cancer is caused by cells dividing at an uncontrollable rate. Smoking might influence that. UV radiation, so that's from the sun, might influence that. X-rays are another thing that might influence that, so that's why you don't want to get too many X-rays. All of those are those carcinogens. Let's look a little bit now at these steps in tumor formation, and you might have heard of these as related to the stages of cancer. So there's 4 stages of cancer, 4 being the worst. Typically, cancer is discovered in the 2nd or the 3rd stage. So these relate to the steps in tumor formation. So this first step of a tumor formation is the primary tumor develops a group of cells that are growing out of control. So essentially you have a group of cells that are growing out of control. They develop and they start to congregate together. Typically at this point, you don't necessarily realize any changes in your body. You probably don't have any symptoms of cancer at this point. You're probably not going to recognize it. Step 2, the tumor is going to get bigger and stimulate blood vessels to supply it from the surrounding tissue. So at this point, the tumor is actually infringing on the surrounding cells. So the tumor is getting bigger. It might be physically pressing on those surrounding cells, and it's also taking stimulating blood cells to feed it nutrients. So it's getting bigger. That means that it's taking blood cells or nutrients from the surrounding cells. So it's negatively impacting surrounding cells. So depending on where the cancer is, you might realize at this point, and you might have some symptoms. Step number 3 in tumor formation, the tumor cells are going to squeeze into those blood vessels and also those lymph nodes, and they're going to move to other parts of the body. That's that metastasis. So step 3, you actually have that tumor. Some little cells are squeezing into the blood and are trying to move to other parts of the body. That's that metastasis. And in step 4, the last step, the tumor cells reach those areas and actually begin to grow secondary tumors. So tumor cells start to try to travel in step 3, but they don't actually form a new tumor in a secondary area that's noticeable until step 4, and this is the last step of tumor formation. So let's just take a look at a little bit about what that looks like. So you've got your tumor. Your tumor, again, is going to stimulate those blood vessels to surround it. So tumors are always surrounded by blood vessels. Little tiny cells are then going to break apart, and they are going to travel to different parts of your body. Typically, they're going to congregate in parts of your body that have a high supply of blood volume. So maybe your heart, your lungs, your brain. Once they get there, the tumor then actually has to develop from those migrating cells. So it's not like one cell will do it. You have to have multiple cells that are going to come together and that are going to form a new tumor. So those are the stages of cancer. What we're going to have for you now is I want you to do a little bit of your own research. So in the next activity, you're going to go ahead and you are going to research different cancer treatments. I always find this is interesting because this is the part of cancer that people have heard about. They might know someone that has cancer. They might know someone that's gone through different treatments. So you can actually figure out what those treatments are, how they help, and what side effects they might cause. So you're going to pick 2 different treatments and you are going to research them. You are responsible for knowing 2 treatments in detail for the summative that's going to be at the end of this unit. And then at the very bottom, I went ahead and I posted a note that says about each type of cancer treatment. So just check your answers to make sure that you got everything that I think is important. So make sure you check that PowerPoint note that's below this as well too, that says cancer treatments, to make sure that you got everything important in your note as well too. All right, next up, we're going to start talking about cell specialization.